The FBI and the Department of Justice are investigating how Jeffrey Epstein died this weekend.
Jeffrey Epstein's death was never what they told you. The official story says he took his own life, but something isn't right.
A life that ended in disgrace, a death that has left many, many questions.
Reports say the cameras weren't working and the guards didn't check on him. He was in a facility designed to prevent inmate deaths, yet the most high-profile prisoner still died. Now new details change everything. The FBI director knows the truth, and it's not what the public was led to believe. So what truth did he reveal? In this video, we'll explain why Epstein's death isn't what you've been told.
In the letter addressed to FBI Director Kash Patel, Bondi basically says, I asked you for the full and complete files related to Jeffrey Epstein. I received 200 pages of documents.
Doubts in the official report. FBI director eventually admitted that Jeffrey Epstein's death was not as straightforward as officials initially claimed. This was a big deal because, for years, the Department of Justice stuck to its story that Epstein had died by suicide. Epstein was locked up at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in New York, a federal facility known for housing high-risk inmates. He was facing serious charges related to human trafficking and had connections to some of the most powerful people in the world. On August 10, 2019, he was found dead in his cell, and authorities quickly ruled it a suicide by hanging. But from the beginning, the details surrounding his death didn't sit right with a lot of people. The official explanation from the New York City medical examiner was that Epstein had tied a bed sheet to the bunk in his cell and hanged himself. The Justice Department's Inspector General later labeled the entire situation as negligence, not foul play. Attorney General William Barr backed this up, calling it a perfect storm of mistakes. But the more details came out, the harder it was to believe that all of these mistakes had just happened by chance. Epstein's own lawyers weren't buying it. Neither were independent experts. The idea that one of the most high-profile prisoners in the country could die under these circumstances just before he was set to stand trial raised too many questions. This is just the beginning. We will be revealing more questionable facts. Epstein's legal team flat out rejected the idea that he had taken his own life. They argued that he was actively working on his defense and was determined to fight the charges against him. To get answers, they hired Dr. Michael Baden, a well-known forensic pathologist, to review the autopsy. Baden pointed out that Epstein had not shown any signs of being suicidal. In fact, he was making plans for his future. His brother, Mark Epstein, also strongly believed that he was murdered. The family and their legal team demanded a deeper investigation, but their concerns were repeatedly ignored or dismissed by officials. What made this even more suspicious was what happened a few weeks before Epstein's death. On July 23, 2019, he was found in his cell with marks on his neck. Prison officials called it a failed suicide attempt, but Epstein himself never confirmed this. At the time, he was sharing a cell with Nicholas Tartaglione, a former cop who had been arrested for multiple murders. Tartaglione claimed he saved Epstein's life, but many doubted his version of events. After this incident, Epstein was placed on suicide watch, but just days before his death, he was taken off it, which made no sense given what had allegedly happened before. Then came the autopsy results, which raised even more red flags. Epstein's neck had fractures, including a break in the hyoid bone. Dr. Baden pointed out that this kind of injury was far more common in strangulation cases than in suicides by hanging. The DOJ still insisted it was suicide, but a number of medical experts were skeptical. Epstein also had bruises on his wrists and shoulders, which were not explained in the official report. Despite these concerning details, authorities shut down any further investigations and declared the case closed. The Metropolitan Correctional Center was already known for having serious problems of poor management, corruption, and security failures. Inmates and former employees had described the prison as chaotic, with guards who were either inattentive or outright abusive. The facility was so poorly run that in 2019, the year Epstein died, the Federal Bureau of Prisons announced it would shut down MCC permanently due to unsafe conditions. This was the same prison where notorious drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was once held under heavy surveillance. Yet for some reason, Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most high-profile prisoners in the country, was not given the same level of security. Guards at MCC were often overworked, and many were forced to pull double shifts. Some were even caught sleeping on the job, including the 2 guards responsible for checking on Epstein the night he died. It wasn't the first time serious lapses had happened. In 2011, a former CIA officer named John Kiriakou, who was held at MCC, described the prison as filthy and dangerous, with guards who simply didn't care. Given MCC's history of failures, many questioned whether Epstein's death was a result of incompetence or something much more deliberate. On the night of Epstein's death, there were major security failures that made the situation even more suspicious. 2 cameras outside his cell conveniently malfunctioned, meaning there was no footage of what actually happened. The 2 guards on duty, Tova Noel and Michael Thomas, were supposed to check on Epstein every 30 minutes. Instead, they were reportedly shopping online and sleeping at their desks. They later admitted to falsifying log entries to cover up their negligence. Despite this, they managed to avoid jail time by striking a plea deal. The fact that these failures all happened at the same time only made the situation seem more staged. The timeline of events surrounding Epstein's death also raised a lot of questions. He was last seen alive at 10:30 p.m. on August 9, 2019. Epstein was reportedly in good spirits. He met with his lawyers for several hours, discussing his legal strategy and future plans. According to those present, he didn't seem suicidal or distressed. After the meeting, he returned to his cell in the special housing unit. Around 7 p.m., he ate dinner alone, as he no longer had a cellmate. Later that evening, other inmates reported hearing the sound of Epstein's cell door closing, but nothing unusual after that. Prison staff made their last recorded check on him at 10:30 p.m., marking him as alive. After that, no one saw or heard anything from him. The next morning at 6:30 a.m., officers found him unresponsive in his cell. The lack of noise, struggle, or any witnesses made the timeline suspicious, especially since no guards had checked on him for hours despite being required to. Medical staff tried to revive him but failed, and he was pronounced dead at 6:39 a.m. The problem was that no one had seen or heard anything unusual during the night. There were no reports of a struggle, no alarms going off, and no other inmates claiming they heard anything. For someone to have taken their own life under these circumstances, without any noise or disturbance, seemed highly unlikely. Another strange detail was that Epstein was left alone in his cell at a critical moment. After his alleged first suicide attempt, he was supposed to have a cellmate at all times. But just hours before he was found dead, his cellmate was removed, leaving him alone. This raised serious concerns because having a cellmate would have made it much harder for anything suspicious to happen. Epstein's legal team repeatedly asked why he was not on suicide watch.
What is suicide watch, really?
So he was found in a state of distress. This is about 3 weeks ago.
And why his security was so lax. Officials responded by saying he had been evaluated and was taken off the watch list because he showed no signs of suicidal thoughts. But given the circumstances, this explanation didn't make much sense. Public skepticism about Epstein's death was overwhelming. Polls showed that only 16% of Americans believed he had actually committed suicide. Nearly half thought he was murdered to protect powerful people who didn't want him to testify. The phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" became a viral meme, spreading across social media and beyond.
Was taken off suicide watch for no reason, but what do the experts know?
People weren't just talking about it online. They were bringing it up in interviews, protests, and everyday conversations. Many felt that the case was shut down too quickly, with too many unanswered questions left on the table. Epstein had been linked to some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world. The idea that he conveniently died before he could reveal anything damaging only fueled suspicions. There were too many coincidences, too many failures, and too many unanswered questions for this to be brushed off as a simple suicide. The fact that Epstein was able to die under these circumstances, despite all the red flags, made it hard for many people to believe the official story. Then attention shifted from what the officials had to say to everyone who might have wanted Epstein silenced. What you will find out next will leave you speechless. Theories on who may have wanted Epstein silenced. The theories about why Epstein may have been silenced all point to one thing: he had too much information on too many powerful people. His connections spanned politics, finance, entertainment, and even intelligence agencies. If Epstein had gone to trial, he could have exposed individuals who had everything to lose. The fact that he died before revealing anything significant only fueled suspicions that his death was more than just a failure of the prison system. One of the biggest mysteries is what happened to the evidence collected after his arrest. The FBI raided his Manhattan townhouse, private island, and other properties, seizing computers, hard drives, CDs, and thousands of photographs. Some reports suggested these storage devices contained images and videos of high-profile individuals, but none of this was ever made public. Epstein's infamous Black Book, which listed the names of politicians, celebrities, and business executives, was heavily discussed in the media.
Those contacts were put in what is referred to by journalists as Epstein's Little Black Book.
But after his death, it disappeared from the conversation. The Black Book was one of the most talked about pieces of evidence in the case. It contained the names, phone numbers, and addresses of hundreds of high-profile individuals, including politicians, celebrities, business executives, and even members of royal families. The book first came to public attention in 2009 when Epstein's former house manager, Alfredo Rodriguez, tried to sell it for $50,000, calling it the Holy Grail of Epstein's network. Rodriguez later went to prison for obstruction of justice after failing to hand over the book to authorities. The contents of the Black Book were leaked online years later, revealing an extensive network of contacts. Among the names listed were Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, and well-known figures like Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Alan Dershowitz, and even influential billionaires such as Leslie Wexner. Many of these individuals claimed they had minimal contact with Epstein or were unaware of his criminal activities, but the presence of their names in his personal records raised major questions. One of the most suspicious aspects of the Black Book was how little attention it received after Epstein's death. Despite containing potentially crucial evidence, law enforcement never made a major public effort to investigate its contents. Some entries were reportedly marked with symbols or notes that suggested certain individuals had a closer relationship with Epstein than others. However, none of these details were ever fully explored in legal proceedings. Given the level of secrecy surrounding Epstein's financial and social connections, some theorists believe the Black Book may have been part of a larger blackmail operation. Epstein was known to have hidden cameras in his properties, and many suspect that his network was designed to gather compromising material on the rich and powerful. If the Black Book contained not just names but also information about potential victims or criminal activity, it could have been one of the most dangerous pieces of evidence in the entire case. Despite public interest, no further information about the Black Book has been officially disclosed. Some believe it was quietly buried by authorities to protect certain individuals, while others think that those in power made sure its contents never became part of any legal proceedings. Beyond politics and royalty, Epstein's inner circle included Wall Street executives, CEOs, and intelligence operatives who might have wanted him silenced. Leslie Wexner, the billionaire behind Victoria's Secret, had an unusually close relationship with Epstein, giving him power over his finances. Many have speculated that Epstein used his financial connections to gain leverage over the ultra-wealthy. Theories suggest that some of these individuals feared what Epstein might reveal, especially if he had incriminating evidence on them. Another major mystery was Epstein's source of wealth. Despite living like a billionaire, he didn't run a well-known company or have a clear financial empire. He claimed to be a money manager for the ultra-rich, but few details about his financial dealings were ever made public. Some believe his fortune was tied to blackmail operations, while others think intelligence agencies funded him in exchange for information. When he died, his estate was valued at around $600 million, but the full extent of his assets and financial records has never been fully explained. Given how much secrecy surrounded his money, many expected that the people closest to him, especially Ghislaine Maxwell, would shed light on his operations. Maxwell's arrest in 2020 was seen as a turning point. As Epstein's closest associate, she had first-hand knowledge of his financial dealings, his connections, and the people involved in his network. Many believed her trial would expose the powerful figures tied to Epstein, but instead of providing answers, it only raised more questions. However, her trial avoided exposing any new names, and the case was handled in a way that seemed designed to prevent further damage to high-profile figures. Unlike Epstein, Maxwell survived in custody, but she made cryptic comments about fearing for her safety. Some believe she was used as a scapegoat, allowing authorities to close the case without exposing the full truth. Epstein's 2008 plea deal in Florida also showed how much protection he had. Instead of facing serious federal charges, he was given a deal that let him serve just 13 months in a private wing of a county jail. He was even allowed to leave during the day on a work release program. The prosecutor who approved this deal was Alexander Acosta, who later became Secretary of Labor under Donald Trump. When questioned about Epstein's case, Acosta reportedly claimed he had been told to back off because Epstein belonged to intelligence. Whether or not this was true, it reinforced the belief that Epstein had powerful people protecting him. Even after his death, the handling of his case exposed deep flaws in the legal system. Many of his victims had come forward years before his final arrest, yet they were ignored or silenced. Epstein's wealth and influence allowed him to operate for decades without consequences. His 2019 arrest only happened after intense media pressure, suggesting that without public outrage, he might have continued his operations indefinitely. Even now, besides Maxwell, no one from his inner circle has faced serious legal consequences. This gave more reason for a reevaluation of the case by the FBI. What you're about to hear will blow your mind. FBI director hints at a different truth. FBI director revisited the Epstein case and hinted at a side of the story that had been largely ignored. It was one that pointed to financial loops, hidden connections, and a web of money that seemed to have no clear origin. While Epstein's influence reached Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and even elite scientific circles, his actual financial dealings remained sneaky. The deeper the FBI looked, the more inconsistencies they found. One of the biggest questions was how Epstein maintained his vast fortune despite not having a legitimate, publicly documented source of income. The FBI discovered that Epstein's wealth moved through a series of offshore accounts, shell companies, and hidden transactions that made it nearly impossible to trace who was actually funding him or who he was moving money for. His financial empire wasn't just suspicious, it was structured in a way that suggested he was laundering money on a massive scale. Investigators uncovered offshore accounts tied to Epstein in jurisdictions known for secrecy, including the U.S. Virgin Islands, Panama, Switzerland, and the Cayman Islands. But these accounts weren't just holding money. They were part of a financial network that appeared designed to obscure the real players behind Epstein's operations. Some transactions suggested that money was being funneled in and out of these accounts with no clear business purpose, a classic sign of money laundering. The sums moving through these accounts were enormous, with some estimates suggesting Epstein controlled assets worth far beyond the $577 million recorded in his will. Deutsche Bank, one of the major financial institutions connected to Epstein, faced scrutiny for allowing him to move large sums despite numerous red flags. The bank had flagged Epstein as high risk due to his criminal history, yet he was still able to process transactions that didn't align with any real business activities. The FBI found evidence that Epstein used his banking connections to move money not just for himself, but possibly for powerful associates who wanted their financial dealings hidden. One of the biggest financial loops discovered by the FBI involved Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands. Epstein had an unusual level of control over Wexner's assets, even managing his personal finances and real estate. Wexner reportedly transferred ownership of his $77 million Manhattan mansion to Epstein for free, a move that made little financial sense. Investigators questioned whether Wexner's money was being used to fund Epstein's operations or whether Epstein had some form of leverage over him. The lack of transparency around these transactions raised concerns that Wexner was just one of many wealthy individuals tied to Epstein through undisclosed financial arrangements. Beyond Wall Street, Epstein had an unsettling level of access to the tech industry. The FBI discovered that he met with some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley, including tech billionaires and AI researchers. He donated large sums to institutions like Harvard and MIT, where he was welcomed despite his criminal history. But his involvement in scientific research wasn't just about philanthropy. There were indications that he was funding projects related to artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and even genetic modification. Some FBI analysts suspected that his financial support for these fields wasn't just about personal curiosity, but part of a larger undisclosed agenda. Epstein's ties to academia extended to research into artificial life, longevity, and even controversial genetic experiments. He openly spoke about his desire to use his own DNA to see the human race, an idea that disturbed many of the scientists he interacted with. His financial loops in the scientific community suggested that he was using his money to gain influence over researchers and their work. The fact that some of the world's leading scientists continued to meet with him even after his conviction raised serious ethical questions. The FBI also found that Epstein's network of offshore accounts was also about controlling assets for others. Some investigators suspected that Epstein was acting as a financial middleman for powerful figures who wanted to keep their transactions secret. The The structure of his financial empire suggested that he was not just moving his own money, but possibly laundering funds for politicians, business leaders, and even intelligence agencies. One of the most alarming discoveries involved real estate transactions linked to Epstein. He owned multiple properties around the world, including his infamous island, a ranch in New Mexico, and luxury homes in Paris and Palm Beach. But some of these properties were registered under obscure corporate entities, making it difficult to determine who actually owned them. Investigators found that some of these properties had been purchased through offshore companies, further complicating efforts to track the flow of money. As the FBI dug deeper, they also found evidence that Epstein's operations extended beyond financial crimes. Some reports suggested that his properties were equipped with hidden surveillance equipment, including cameras placed in private rooms. If true, this meant Epstein may have been collecting blackmail material on his guests, including high-profile figures in politics, finance, and entertainment. The existence of such material would explain why so many powerful individuals had continued associating with him despite his conviction. The FBI's findings raised the possibility that Epstein's role wasn't just that of a wealthy financier. He may have been part of a larger intelligence operation. Former Israeli intelligence officer Ari Ben-Menashe claimed that Epstein had ties to Mossad, suggesting that his financial dealings and blackmail activities could have been part of a broader effort to gain leverage over influential figures. If Epstein was indeed working with intelligence agencies, it would explain why his financial loops were so complex and why he was able to move massive sums of money with little oversight. His case doesn't end here still. There's a lot more going on legally you don't know about. Keep watching to find out more. Legal battles against Epstein. After his death, Epstein's death didn't stop the legal battles. Survivors have continued filing lawsuits against his estate, demanding accountability for the abuse they suffered. These lawsuits have led to hundreds of millions in settlements, but many believe the legal system has still failed to expose the full truth. The U.S. Virgin Islands government took legal action against J.P. Morgan Chase, arguing that the bank enabled Epstein's trafficking operation by ignoring clear warning signs. Internal emails revealed that executives were aware of his suspicious transactions, but chose to continue doing business with him. J. Morgan eventually settled for $290 million, while Deutsche Bank, another institution linked to Epstein, paid $75 million to resolve a separate lawsuit. These cases made it clear that Epstein's financial network wasn't operating in isolation. Major institutions played a role in keeping his operations running. Even with these settlements, the full extent of Epstein's wealth and financial dealings remains a mystery. His assets were quickly liquidated after his death, and large sums were transferred into undisclosed trusts. His Manhattan mansion, one of the most expensive in the city, was sold for $51 million, while his Palm Beach estate was demolished after being bought by a developer. His ranch in New Mexico, which was rumored to be a site for disturbing experiments, was quietly sold, and his private islands were taken over by the U.S. Virgin Islands government. Authorities also seized his fleet of private jets, including the infamous Lolita Express. Flight logs from these planes contain the names of celebrities, politicians, and business leaders, but many high-profile figures denied any knowledge of Epstein's activities. Some reports suggest that key flight records may have gone missing, raising suspicions about possible tampering. As more lawsuits pile up, federal agencies have resisted calls to release all Epstein-related documents. The excuse of ongoing investigations has been used repeatedly, yet no major arrests have followed. The Justice Department has avoided reopening deeper probes into Epstein's network, and reports suggest that some documents will remain classified for decades. This secrecy has only increased public distrust, with many questioning why so many names remain hidden. The lack of transparency has also strengthened theories that Epstein's connections were too valuable to expose. His ties to intelligence agencies have raised suspicions that he may have been used for blackmail operations, gathering compromising material on influential figures. Some believe that exposing his network could cause political chaos, which is why key evidence remains sealed. The legal battles surrounding Epstein's associates have also drawn attention to the justice system's double standards. His 2008 plea deal, which allowed him to serve minimal jail time while continuing his lifestyle, exposed how wealth and power can influence legal outcomes. Many believe Epstein was deliberately protected for years, and his sudden death only deepened suspicions about elite immunity. The fact that none of his high-profile connections have faced serious legal consequences reinforces the belief that powerful figures are shielded from accountability. Despite the overwhelming evidence of Epstein's criminal operations, his network has remained largely untouched, with only Ghislaine Maxwell facing prison time. The media's handling of Epstein's case has also been heavily criticized. Major news outlets covered his death extensively, but often avoided deeper questions about his connections. Some journalists attempted to investigate further, but were met with resistance from editors and executives. ABC News anchor Amy Robach was caught on a hot mic, admitting that her Epstein report was suppressed, claiming she had interviews and evidence that were never allowed to air. The leaked footage went viral, fueling accusations that the media was helping to protect Epstein's powerful associates. Social media platforms also played a role in controlling the narrative, with discussions about Epstein's connections being censored or flagged as misinformation. Some reporters who dug too deep faced legal threats and media blackouts, making it clear that even with Epstein gone, efforts to control the story have not stopped. The political divide over Epstein's legacy has further complicated efforts to uncover the truth. Both left-wing and right-wing figures have used his case to attack their opponents while ignoring their own side's connections to him. Some focus on specific politicians' ties to Epstein while refusing to acknowledge the bipartisan nature of his network. The real issue isn't about political affiliation. It's about how power protects those at the top. Epstein's influence stretched across business, politics, and entertainment, and the lack of accountability for those in his circle has only reinforced public skepticism. Many believe that without full transparency, the full extent of Epstein's operations will never be known. The biggest unanswered question remains: what did the government really know? Epstein's close relationships with intelligence officials and global power brokers have led to speculation that he was more than just a wealthy predator. Some reports suggest that he was an asset used for blackmail, collecting compromising material on influential figures for political leverage. If that's true, then the cover-up is about hiding the involvement of governments or intelligence agencies. The FBI, CIA, and other agencies have been accused of knowing more about Epstein's activities than they admit, but so far they have avoided answering critical questions. The decision to keep key documents sealed for decades has only fueled more speculation that certain people were protected because exposing them would reveal something much bigger. With Epstein dead and many files locked away, there's a growing fear that the full truth will never come out. Whistleblowers would need to step forward for any real transparency to happen, but powerful forces are still working to keep the story contained. Survivors continue to demand justice, but the legal system's unwillingness to fully expose Epstein's network has left many frustrated. The fight for the truth isn't over, but whether real accountability will ever happen remains uncertain. What do you think happened on the night Epstein died in his cell? Let us know what you think in the comments section. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Click on the next video displayed on your screen. You will enjoy it.